And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. My guest today is Charlene Lee. Charlene, for the past 2 decades, has been helping people see the future, which is sort of an interesting thing to have as a career. She's the author of 5 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Open Leadership. And she's the co-author of the critically acclaimed book Groundswell. She was the founder of Altimeter Group, an analyst firm that was acquired in 2005 by Profit. She's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School. I'm thrilled to have you. I'm a little fanning out today because I've read all your work and have been a fan for a long time. So I'll try to not get all giddy on you. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So let's talk about sort of your journey. You are in lots of different things, right? So you've got the speaking side, you've got the research side, you've got the consulting side, you've had an exit of your business, successful authorship. How have you sort of unpacked all these things? How have you played these things out in such a way that have achieved such great outcomes like they have?
I still feel like I'm still trying to achieve it. So it's like so interesting to put it that way. I think more than anything else, I've always been very curious about what the future brings. And in particular, how do people deal with it and make the most of it? I like to say that I live for what I call the aha moment, which is why
Okay.
the research is so interesting. Because I'm kind of curious. I want to know what the answer is.
So part of this is your own sort of curiosity and your own sort of being a lifelong learner. So once you decided to sort of go down this path, how do you choose sort of when to publish and how to connect speaking and consulting? Because where I was going a bit earlier is you've achieved some amazing success and things that people hope to achieve as they sort of dive into this world of thought leadership. So what are the some of the things that you've learned from what you've done along the way that others could benefit from?
I think from the research side of view, point of view, is when do you publish? You publish when you think somebody could really benefit from it. And I've never published anything to get followers or to build my reputation. It's always been to be able to help other people. So that's what's always guided my publishing. So I sometimes publish things when am really not comfortable with it yet, but I feel like I have to get it out there. And then the speaking kind of comes with the publishing. People want to hear more about it. They want to have it applied to their situations.
Got it. So how does that relationship work where someone reads an article or picks up an HBR blog or picks up your book and says, "Wow, this Charlene is really fascinating. We should bring her in for our conference." Or is it that they're seeing you speaking and then it leads to other opportunities on the consulting side and then books? Or how are those two connected from a business perspective?
It's actually they're very connected. When I write my research, I start with I take a design thinking approach, which is to focus really specifically on the problem I'm trying to address. What's the problem? I spend a huge amount of time on that. So when somebody reads it with that problem, then they call me like, "Hey, you seem to know something about my problem. I feel like you're standing over my shoulder watching me work. Can we talk?"
So that's interesting. And when you say that's my problem, let's talk about that for a little bit because some folks come into this space and say, "Listen, I'm smart, I'm curious, I'm an academic, whatever the case is, but I've got to pick something that is a problem that needs to be solved." So how do you sort of balance that, like, your discipline around the research, and then you go, "Wow, that's a problem that people actually pay good money to have solved." How do you untangle that web?
Well, I always in my interviews ask people, so what's on your mind? What would you like to see me research?
Okay.
What do you not have the answer for? That's where I begin and often end all of my conversations. Like, what else would you like to know? So a colleague of mine said, always do the ABR, always be researching.
Okay, I love that.
So constantly asking that. And then from there, I start parsing apart and really digging down. What is the real question? Is that really the question? No, it's something deeper than that.
So interesting. So people will tell you what they need, but then just because a random individual makes a comment doesn't mean that you're going to then spend 18 months of your life writing a book on that. So how do you sort of dive in? I like what you said about diving in deeper, but how do you sort of take something that at first is an aha moment to you and either decide to go deeper or to sort of toss it away? There might not be enough meat on the bone.
Well, I'll talk about my next book, which is called The Disruption Mindset, which is coming out in June. And disruption has been around as a buzzword for 20 years, the entire time of my career as an analyst. And people would ask me, so how do I actually create disruption? How do I actually create meaningful, deep, transformational, disruptive change and growth?
Okay.
And I realized I didn't know the answer to that. So I'm like,
Ah,
"That's a good question. Let me go look at it." So I've been teasing it apart. What does it mean to be really disruptive, and how do you do it? Because there is a philosophy out there that you need to be disruptive, but hey, if you're a big incumbent company, you're toast.
right,
You can't be
right.
disruptive. And I find that to be not true. So I'm like, what is it that these companies who are able to disrupt themselves, what are they doing?
So let's push on that. So now that gives you the validation you need to say, ah, there's a book here because there's a real here, right? In terms of how does one disrupt? If we all want to be more disruptive, then the next logical question is, how might I go about that? And that's sort of the promise of the book. And I assume that would naturally lend itself to consulting relationship after that, where organizations say, hey, can you help me develop these disruptive capabilities inside of my organization? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, very much so. I write the books to be helpful to people. And if they can go off and do this on their own, all the power to them. If they want me to come and help them take that first step with a workshop or speaking, I can do that. If they want deeper hand holding, then my parent company, Profit, can go do that.
Interesting. Okay.
Again, that's how I kind of parse it out. I don't have to do all of it. I can't do all of it.
Sure. So I love that. So let's go backwards a little bit because I am fortunate enough to be working with lots and lots of consulting firms from around the globe, and all sort of founded by thought leaders, people that are writing books and have a perspective, etc. Given that you've founded a successful consulting firm and have had an exit there, and then have stayed on with the acquirer, which is Profit, which is a great company. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are the things that you might do differently if you were to start another consulting company or advising someone on how to develop another consulting company with potentially an exit in mind?
Yeah, again, I think the key thing to always do is to never start a company with an exit in mind,
Okay.
because you're doing that, you're doing it for the wrong reason. When I started Altimeter, again, I saw an opportunity there to do things very differently as an analyst firm. And even when I started the process of being acquired by Profit, didn't start it that way. I was in the search for a strategic partner and an investment to grow the company. And I had as an option in the back pocket the opportunity to be acquired, but it had to be the right circumstances. So when Profit came along, I'm like, well, and they said, we don't want to do an investment. We just don't do that, but we'd be interested in acquiring you. And I went, oh, well, that's interesting. Pull out the back pocket option, read what's on it. Literally, I have it written down so you don't get swayed. Like, what are the circumstances? And there were two things on there. There had to be a strategic fit,
Right.
and there had to be a strong connection to culture.
Love it.
And that's why I have stayed on at Profit, is because the culture is so strong. It's so in line with the things that I believe in. So
I love
a
that.
lot of people like, I just want to get out of there. I'm like, I'm pretty darn
So
happy.
so let me one is sort of correct something I said. My intent wasn't build it with the intent to sell it, but build it with having that as an option to have potentially an exit. Because I agree with you. If you just build it for the sake of I'm going to build this and do this for 3 years and have an exit. So let me sort of reframe the question. What are the things now that you've been through an exit that you may have done differently or that you did that worked well that when you're starting a company, it's good to be thinking about, even though it might not be, on the radar?
Yeah, that's a better input. I think it's two things. I think having a brand. A brand is
Yep.
so important because in many ways, what Profit was acquiring was our brand in the digital space, and they wanted to be more famous, have a better brand in the digital space, have an opening. So, really investing in brand right from the very beginning was really important for
So give me
us.
some examples of that because I agree 1,000%. But what's an example of investment? I mean, writing a book could be an example of an investment in the brand and investing in thought leadership. But what are the other things that you do to make smart investments into the brand?
As a thought leader, it's so tempting to make it about you. So which the brand? Is it you, the thought leader, or is it an umbrella brand? And the thing that we did at Altimeter was each partner agreed that the personal brand and the company brand lived in harmony with each other.
Not easy. Not
So
easy to
it
achieve.
wasn't, yeah, and not easy. And so you need a special kind of person who understands what brand means. And for some people, the Altimeter brand was, I mean, a lot of people know Altimeter and don't know me.
Sure.
Other people know me, but don't know Altimeter. So why not promote? Can you actually promote and lift up two brands at the same time? That was counterintuitive and it worked brilliantly for us.
Great. And I agree with you. And I think it's a balancing act, there's a time where it may be wise for you, the individual, to be the brand, if it's more personality based, if you're more on the keynote side. But ultimately, one of the things I always tell my clients is, listen, the objective is ultimately to make you irrelevant or obsolete. And you can't do that if all everyone is buying is the name on the door, which is yours. So that's
Right.
cool.
And so, yeah, if you want to be acquired, you can't be the name of yourself
Right.
on that door.
Exactly. So that's good insight there. Let's talk about the other. So now the other things that you said in terms of what went well for you at Profit is the strategic fit and the cultural fit. So let's talk about each of those. So culturally, you could have a great strategic fit, but there were things that you were probably sniffing out as the acquired to go, I feel comfortable here, or this is going to be a disaster, right? So how did you know it was a cultural fit?
um, Walked in and sat down, and everything in the discussions constantly was, how do we make this work? How do we make this work? And one of their values is being just human, just this sense of vulnerability, humility, not knowing the answers, and just being all the things that being human is wonderful for. And that just really spoke to me.
But let me pause you for a second if I could. So there are plenty of consulting firms where the culture is a little bit of hubris, a little bit of arrogance, a little bit of smartest people in the room. And not that that's a good thing or a bad thing. We could debate, and I think we know where we'd land there. But that's just the culture, right? So if you think about some of the big firms, we don't need to name them. That's just their culture. And the little firm sort of being gobbled by the bigger one, you're not going to change that. So I think it's really, really wise how you sort of did a culture detection there and said, this just feels right. This feels human. We have the same value.
Right. And the reason why is because if you're aligned in your culture and your values, you can work out the strategy.
Right. Right.
You can change your strategy. It's very, very difficult to change your culture.
Totally. So interesting. So that was the indication that it's a cultural fit, and obviously you're still there and happy. So you made the right choice. How do you know, strategically, because what's a strategic fit for you as the acquired versus the acquirer? Those two things have to be equal, right? So how do you know that? How do you get a sense of that?
We really sat down and had really deep discussions about, why are you interested in us? Why would we be interested in you? Where are the synergies? I mean, the typical ideas, but also tapping into how have they worked with other thought leaders, how they worked with other authors. And here was a really big tip. Almost every single person on the executive committee had written a book.
So you weren't the first sort of experiment. They've done this before.
Far from it. Far from it. They all realized what it was. Their executive chairman
Sure.
is Profit's executive chairman is David Ocker, who's a professor and literally the father of brands.
Right.
And it is so awesome to sit down in the office and just brainstorm stuff with David. Like, dang, I got this thing going. What do you got going? So we just literally talk with each other over the water cooler, literally, about our big ideas and books. I mean, how cool and fun is that?
Well, I was going to say, it says something about the values where you have an executive team where each and every one has their own sort of flavor of thought leadership that they've invested in. So not only do they know what it takes to do that, but they also, I mean, what great conversations must happen around the lunchroom there. Like, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Very interesting. That's how you knew. How do you think they knew that you were the right fit for them, both strategically and culturally?
Again, I think the culture fit was a key part of all those conversations. They looked at our values, they looked at the way that we talked with each other, and how we, frankly, how you go through a negotiation gives you a lot of
Yeah.
insights into how it's going to work. Because there's nothing more contentious than arguing over how you're going to be bought.
Right.
And the other part was the strategy. I actually went, and Profit has done a good job of other acquisitions. I asked to be connected with all the other CEOs of the companies they had acquired.
Got it.
And I asked them, so how did that go? What worked, what didn't work? What should I be looking out for? So, of course, any sort of integration is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that first year was really miserable and in so many ways. And I don't sugarcoat it. It's just hard. It's just hard to integrate a company into another one. But the thing that kept us going were these two
Sure.
things: the strategic fit, we believe that it was there, and the culture just kind of smooth things over.
That's fantastic. Well, that's awesome insight. Let's talk a little bit now around authorship. So you have a new book coming out. You talked about it's time to write when you know you've got something to answer. What are things that you've noticed that are different in the publishing world today than maybe when you wrote your first book, and how are you adopting
Oh,
to
it's
that?
so
Yeah.
different. And I wrote my first book. I published it in 2008, doing this one just 11 years later. My first book had a significant royalty up front. It was put to auction. I had an agent, I had lawyers. This one I'm self publishing.
Right, so fascinating, right? So let me drill on that a little bit because I think way back in the stone ages of 2008, right, where I think we all had AOL accounts or whatever we had then. If you said self-publishing, that was sort of code for, "Oh, I'm so sorry you didn't get a big New York publisher to accept you," right? It was sort of welcome to Loserville. That's not the case today. So tell me how you went about making those decisions.
Well, I think that the opposite is true now.
Yes.
If you, so it's true, you self publish if you can't get one, but you also self publish if you have such a strong base, you're pretty confident you can drive the sales without the help of a
Right,
publisher. And this is, I think, my fifth or sixth book now, depending on how you count it, but my fourth publisher relationship. And my other publishers have been fantastic.
right.
But this time, I wanted to do things with the book that they couldn't do.
Sure.
I want to be able to customize the book whenever and however I want.
So creative freedom.
Creative freedom, total creative freedom. And frankly, as any author knows, you're doing most of the heavy lifting for marketing, anyways. So, and the last part is the economics. I really got sick of buying my book back. I had, twice of what it costs to actually print it. And because I do a lot of speaking, I want to include the book in my speaking. And I just didn't have the flexibility to do the deals I wanted to.
So I love it. So instead of you being relegated to, a royalty stream of a buck or two a book or whatever the case is, you now have the lion's share of it, right? You actually have cost to paper and ink and blah blah blah. But now it's an 80% margin product, and once you come to the realization that you're the primary sales force of that product, not the publisher, there's a math piece of this that people often discount.
Right. And you go, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. So, and also, if I'm using the book as a promotional vehicle, it's a pretty expensive vehicle if I have to buy the book back myself versus being able to print it myself.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of different reasons why I decided to do a self publishing route more than anything else because I've done it. I've done it multiple times now. I've seen how it works. If you're a serious business author trying to build your platform, I highly recommend to first time authors to get a publisher because this is too much to
Too
have to think
overwhelming
about.
to right.
It's just too much. Writing a book is hard enough. To self publish a book on top of that, to drive all the marketing and the planning and everything else, that's really difficult to do.
But if you think about it at a little bit of a later stage, your second, your third, your fourth, you've got a little bit more infrastructure. You've built the platform. You've got a database, right? So yes, you have to focus on creating a good book from a content perspective, but there's some assets that you have developed as an entity that can be deployed in service of that after the first one.
Exactly. We think of it as having a platform. Once you have a platform, you have your lists, you have your followers, it becomes so much easier.
Got it. Okay, so let's assume now that we're talking to you 10 or 15 years ago. What advice would you give you as you were just starting into this world of thought leadership? Because there's definitely people out there that fit that model.
It's all about your list. I'll
Okay.
just say that
Keep
again
going.
and
Okay.
again. The best advice I ever got, which I didn't follow, was to have a really good email newsletter list and to be really consistent about posting on it. So the shorthand is it's all about the list, but who do you have a direct relationship with? I decided not to do the email newsletter because it was getting very confusing between my personal email newsletter and my company
Sure.
email newsletter. So I defaulted to the company. So I have a great list for Altimeter. I don't have a great list for myself, but I do have a huge social media platform. So that's what I invested in. So think about your platform, think about your list, and invest in it.
And when you say invest in it, I'm going to translate that and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you have an obligation, right? So you can get it's not hard to get anybody to sign up once, but you have to nurture that community. You have an obligation to feed them great content and be of service to them and give them insights. And just because I signed up once doesn't mean I'm going to be loyal to you for next 5 or 10 years if you haven't sort of provided me with value and interesting content.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the best thing that you can see from people who are really good influencers is they're really consistent about creating meaningful content. And the reason they do that isn't just to put content out there, they're thinking actively about what does my audience need? What kind of relationship do I want to build with them?
Right.
And I'll give you an example. Uh, one of the things that people do after I do a speech is they come up to me and go, "Hey, that was a great speech," or
Sure.
they say, "I really enjoyed your book," and I go, "Thank you very much. What was your takeaway?" But that follow up question is so essential because it says, "I'm interested in you. I'm interested in how you are learning because I learned from what you learned from." And yeah, by asking that question, I'm saying I want a relationship.
And this has been really, really wonderful. I wanted to just take a minute and
Yeah.
thank you, Charlene, for all that you've shared with us today. Your journey, the way that you go about creating content, the way that you go about thinking about the business, sharing with us the acquisition that you went through, and everything else that you've shared. This has really, really been chock full of great information. I appreciate your work and I appreciate your time with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.